I'll introduce the novel a little bit, assuming that most people have not read it. I had written the first version of this in 1984, and I was not completely satisfied with the voice or the tone of the novel. And I put it aside, as writers often do, and it was in sort of another room of the house, and I would go in and look at it every once in a while, and the manuscript was sort of moldering and getting yellow, and it exuded a certain fascination for me, partly as to why I couldn't write it. I couldn't finish it. It was like it was a secret. And finally, after many years, I was doing more reading and more research into 1905, 1906 in American history, especially around the area of Princeton, New Jersey, where I live. And finally, I think with the election of Barack Obama in 2008, it sort of was like the closure of a long, complicated, somewhat tragic story of the relationships between white people and freed slaves in the United States, and just sort of coming to a trajectory, coming to a kind of ending with this historical event of our first black president being elected. And so at that time, then I sort of felt that I had the tonal key or an ending to the novel that I didn't feel, in some unconscious way, I didn't feel I had the ending back in the 1980s, so that I went back to the novel, and then I revised it. I literally changed every word of the novel that I had, and yet it's still the same basic story with the same characters, but the tone is different. So I thought I should explain that. And then the first version was called The Crossworks Horror, which is an homage to H.P. Lovecraft, one of our mad geniuses of the Gothic in American literature. H.P. Lovecraft wrote a novella called The Dunwich Horror, which probably no one here has read or will admit to having read, because he's a very strange talent. And so that was the original title, and then having rewritten the novel and thought about it again, I recast it, and the new title is The Accursed. And the prologue was something that I had been working on for like 20 years, so if you don't like it, it's too late. Prologue. It is an afternoon in autumn near dusk. The western sky is a spider's web of translucent gold. I am being brought by carriage, 2 horses, muted thunder of their hooves, along narrow country roads between hilly fields, touched with the sun's slanted rays, to the village of Princeton, New Jersey. The urgent pace of the horses has a dreamlike air, like the rocking motion of the carriage, and whoever is driving the horses, his face I cannot see, only his back, stiff and straight in a tight-fitting dark coat. Quickening of a heartbeat that must be my own, yet seems to emanate from without, like a great vibration of the very earth. There is a sense of exhilaration that seems to spring, not from within me, but from the countryside. How hopeful I am, how excited. With what childlike affection shading into wonderment, I greet this familiar yet near-forgotten landscape. Cornfields, wheat fields, pastures in which dairy cows graze, like motionless figures in a landscape by Corot. The calls of red-winged blackbirds and starlings, the shallow though swift-flowing Stony Brook Creek, and the narrow wood-plank bridge over which the horses' hooves and the carriage wheels thump. A smell of rich, moist earth and harvest. I see that I am being propelled along the great road. I am nearing home. I am nearing the mysterious origin of my birth. The journey I undertake with such anticipation is not one of geographical space, but one of time. For the year is 1905, my destination. 1905, the very year of the curse. Now, almost too soon, I am approaching the outskirts of Princeton. It is a small country town of only a few thousand inhabitants, its population swollen by university students during the school term. Spires of churches appear in the near distance, for there are numerous churches in Princeton. Modest farmhouses have given way to more substantial homes, and as the great road advances, very substantial homes. How strange, I'm thinking. There are no human figures. No other carriages or motor cars. A stable, a long, lengthy expanse of a bright iron fence along Elm Road, behind which Crossworks Manse is hidden by tall, splendid elms, oaks, and evergreens. Here is a pasture bordering the red brick Princeton Theological Seminary, where more trees grow, gigantic trees they seem, whose gnarled roots are exposed. Now on Nassau Street, I am passing the wrought iron gate that leads into the university, to fabled Nassau Hall, where once the Continental Congress met in 1783. Yet there are no figures on the campus. All is empty and deserted. Badly, I would like to be taken along Bayard Road to Hodge Road, to my family home. How my heart yearns to turn up the drive and be brought to the very door in the side of the house, through which I might enter with a wild, elated shout, "I am here! I am home!" But the driver does not seem to hear me, or perhaps I'm too shy to call to him, to countermand the directions he has been given. We are passing a church with a glaring white facade and a high gleaming cross. The carriage swerves as if one of the horses has caught a pebble in his hoof. I am staring at the churchyard, for now we are on Witherspoon Street, very nearly in the Negro quarter, and the thought comes to me swift as a knife blade entering my flesh. Why, they are all dead now. That is why no one is here except me.
Thank you. So we are in 1905. We live in enlightened modern times. The first motor cars are rattling along the roads, and yet a demonic curse strikes Princeton. Could you tell us a little about what is this curse, or at least what is the outward sign of it?
Well, it takes 500 pages, so we're just
small outline. Yeah,
I'll do it. Twitter size.
Yeah, do that.
Twitter size. Well, I guess in Freudian terms, I'm not actually a Freudian, but in general Freudian terms, it's the concept of the return of the repressed. That which you have denied and you're literally blind to, as a kind of almost hysterical blindness. The white, privileged Christian leaders of Princeton and by extension the United States were not at that time, had not before that time, and did not after that time, take responsible leadership for dealing with the racial inequities and tragic consequences following the following slavery and the Civil War and the Reconstruction era, in which Negroes, as they were then called, Negroes were extremely discriminated against. I mean, that's a very weak word to say discriminated. But the responsible white Christian leaders who should have done so did not do so. And so the novel is really about the curse on an entire class of people who did not take moral responsibility for that which they should have done. In New Jersey, in these years, there was the beginning of the Klan, the Ku Klux Klan, which I noticed I was reading in the newspapers coming to Ferguson, Missouri. This is like a nightmare because you think these things are over with. You think like maybe since the 1960s there's been some progress, but this American history has a kind of tragic, cyclical nature to it. And so the novel is really about the first stirrings of a progressive, exciting new era, and feminism, women's rights of different kinds, and the organizing of labor and the protection of the working man and working children, because very young children were working at that time in factories and mills and on farms in the United States. So the novel is really about the old-fashioned establishment, and they were mostly all Christian Americans who were very somewhat reactionary and sort of entrenched, and all the new wave, literally new waves of immigrants coming in, new ideas from Europe, ideas of socialism and brotherhood and women's rights, as I said. So kind of the winds of change blowing into the settled community of Princeton, and the drama that arises from the clash of entrenched interests and the new ideas. Of course, I'm on the side of the new ideas because women had very little role in that world. So it's great fun for a woman and a feminist to go back to that era and sort of prick pins in the male vanity. Because there was a good deal of male ego in that world, but often masquerading as reformists. Like Woodrow Wilson would have thought that he was a great, Democrat and a reformist. But then when you look carefully read his letters and read biographies about him, you see that he was extremely. He was a racist. He was a sexist. He was a chauvinist of all kind. I mean, you could throw in any other ist, and he would probably qualify.
And actually, the drama of the novel starts with a double lynching that he sort of
doesn't want to see.
He doesn't want to talk about that. Let's not dwell on the past and the shady parts of the present.
Yes, and the novel is so constructed that you enter it in Woodrow Wilson's consciousness, more or less. So the first chapter is him, and then it switches to somebody else. And you get the impression by that which is not talked about, because I don't really talk about it immediately, that you get like the shadows of this terrible thing that happened only about 25 miles away that the white people don't want to talk about. They say, they don't want to talk about it. He doesn't want to talk about it, Woodrow Wilson, because he fears that his secretary might overhear it. He can't upset the women. It's this rampant, almost comical hypocrisy. But the structure of the novel is such that the reader finds out in detail as the novel goes on what the people are not acknowledging.
The unspeakable is the term that sort of you have to wait a long time before you sort of zooms in on what that actually is. But it encompasses quite a few things.
That's right. And when I was speaking all the things that this person was, homophobic. I mean, need one say, we don't even have to say that, but the idea of homosexuality or homoeroticism of any kind is so completely denied and forbidden, at least in theory. What people are really doing, I don't know, but in theory they weren't talking about this. So there's one chapter called The Unspeakable, which is a complete chapter where Woodrow Wilson manages to fire someone at the university for having done something so unspeakable that nobody can talk about it and nobody can exactly find out what it is, because it's so awful that just to talk about it would be overwhelmingly just impossible. So that's a whole chapter is just called The Unspeakable.
And it's a bit difficult to defend yourself against allegations like that. Yeah.
Well, welcome to America. I mean, this sort of double-speak and hypocrisy goes on all the time, where people are persecuted for something that they can't defend themselves against because the FBI won't let them see the files. But if the FBI investigates you, the fact that the FBI has come to investigate you will cost you your job. But you can't find out why they were doing it, and so you can't defend yourself. It's catch-22 sort of thing. But it's still going on in the United States, like last week, let's say. So having set the novel in the early 20th century, I guess I was being optimistic. I was thinking, well, a lot of this is over with, and it just sort of keeps coming back.
So there's all this contemporary resonance that there is in the
more than I had thought.
More than you thought, yeah.
Oh, more than I thought. Because one letter I read about was either a letter of Woodrow Wilson's or it was in a biography. He would go out on the road. Now, I really admire him. He was the president of Princeton that was probably the most reformist, and he was an intellectual. I just said he was all these other things. So he would go out on the road to make money, to get money for the university and talking to the alums. And he would get kind of wrought up and excited, and of course it was all gentlemen he was speaking to, just gentlemen's groups all over. And he was talking about, I can't remember exactly how he got so overwrought, but he was making some preposterous joke, and he would tell black jokes, or as he called them, pickaninny jokes. But I'm not going to tell any of these jokes because I don't want to be taken up by Twitter or something all around the world. They say, Joyce Carol Oates is telling pickaninny jokes. No, I didn't. I was referring to Woodrow Wilson, who did. I don't even know any of these
We'll defend you.
I don't know any of these awful jokes. I don't really want to know them. So then he was saying, with a lot of swagger and gusto, he's saying, well, this will never come to pass until there's a negress in the White House. And that was considered the most absurd, preposterous, obscene, and outrageous thing that would ever be. And when I read that, I thought, wow, because Barack Obama was elected, and there's a black woman in the White House, and I thought, if only Woodrow Wilson could know, if only these terribly, these vicious racists, if they could only know what was coming in the decades ahead. So it just seemed to me like a kind of thrilling and exhilarating drama that worked itself out. And what they would call the curse, we would just think was change. The whole idea of a progressive America, to them, would be a curse.
Imagine what he would have thought if you had said, well, one day a female president of the United States.
Oh, well, also a female president of Princeton University. That was so exciting. And she was a biologist. Shirley Tillman, a world-renowned biologist who became president, and a wonderful president, too. And before her was a person who was Harold Shapiro, who was Jewish. He was the first Jewish president. So from their point of view, and from the old alums at university, just going, to hell in a handbasket, a Jewish president, a woman president. But now we have just a male. We have an excellent president, but he's like just a male president. He's just one in a great tradition. But who knows what's coming?
What we have talked about here is as if this was an historical novel, but it's actually a historical novel that meets the Gothic, which is sort of like the rational meets the irrational in the same book. How did you? What were your thoughts about about meshing these two very different genres?
Well, I'm not sure that they're always very different. Many Gothic novels are set in the past. That's been a tradition too, because you can sort of do wild, crazy things in the past that maybe you can't get away with in contemporary life so easily. Well, I had a whole series of novels. One is called Bellefleur, that was like a family saga that was set in upstate New York in the 19th century, at a time when there actually were castles being built, the idea of European castles, somewhat smaller maybe than they were in Europe, but they were being built on the Hudson River and up in the Adirondacks, and the novel's set there. And then the Bloodsmoor Romance, which is about women's rights. In the 19th century, this filled with all sorts of women's popular culture and fashions and music and songs and things that women were doing. The whole novel is a romance of women's, the rise of women in the late 19th century. Then Mysteries of Winterturn is 3 classic American mysteries that had never been solved, never been completely dealt with. One is the Lizzie Borden case, and there are a couple of others that you wouldn't know quite as well.
Do you know Lizzie Borden? Took an axe and gave her mother 20 whacks, or what was it? Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. Well, Lizzie Borden was just a very famous or infamous person. She was acquitted of murder, of axe murder of her parents. And the defense attorney's argument was that a Christian woman, white woman of a certain class, could not possibly have done this. She was a lady. And that's kind of interesting that a lady literally couldn't have done that. We know what Queen Victoria said about lesbianism. She said, this is not possible. And there were no laws against lesbians. And, there was law against homosexuality. It was considered the regime of men, the whole prerogative of men. And Oscar Wilde was caught up in that. But there were no corresponding laws against women behaving that way because Queen Victoria said this is not possible, So ladies just didn't even know about these things. At that time in our history, ladies did not even know that they had nether parts. They kind of didn't acknowledge or just didn't sort of know about it. And when I think they took baths, or when doctors examined them, they would wear these sort of billowing nightgown sort of things. And I think it must have been very hard to take a bath. And don't ask me how they had babies, because I don't think they really knew what went on. They just sort of shut their eyes and something really catastrophic happened, but it was not speakable, and you didn't speak about it, and that's sort of the way it was to be a lady. Now, at the same time, downstairs, all the servants were doing the real life, and the servants were fully capable of all these physical things that the ladies couldn't do. My novel is filled with this sort of thing, because I love this kind of history, and we all like to think that we're advanced now, and that it's not like this, that there isn't any women's malady. Back in those days, about 100 years ago, and this touches upon the Accursed also, the medium ideal of the healthy specimen was the male specimen. And so anything about the woman that was particularly women's, women's problems, you might say, those were considered aberrant. So there was like the model for health was the male, and then other things were sort of deviant, I guess you could say. So I was doing these novels, the three that I mentioned, and then the fourth was going to be the Crossbricks Horror. And I wrote the whole novel and did a lot of research into it. But I never felt that I had the right voice for it. The voice that I read to you is a voice I finally hit upon, where I fused myself with the narrator, looking back upon his origins. And then when he goes back in time, and here I got a little emotional myself, he realizes that his parents, they're all gone, because he is older now. He's going back to his hometown. Instead of going back to the place that he remembers, he's going back to a place where nobody lives, because his parents are gone. His friends, everybody's gone. It's like a deserted place, and I found that very, very scary and very, I suppose, just it's the human condition, of course. So this novel was written many years after 1984. It was finished in 2011, for the reasons I mentioned, having to do with Obama. Now, since Obama's election, subsequently he's run into all kinds of problems with his presidency. And some of them are because he was the first black president, and other problems are not. They seem to be his own his personality perhaps, or just things that happen once you get into a high office with all your vision and ideals. Once you get in that high office, it's sort of like climbing up a mountain, I suppose, and there's these fierce winds that we can't see the fierce winds, but when the person gets up there, he's just buffeted by many, many things.
Yeah, you can see that it turned gray in 4 years.
And you think you have your strong personality and your ideals and your vision, but once you get up there, but in a democracy, I suppose, where there are all these different forces contending, you can't hold course. So the possibility of tragedy arises, I think, when the idealist forges ahead into a reality that's Shakespearean in its complexity.
Yeah. You quote St. Augustine for saying that all diseases of Christians are to be, what did I say? Ascribed to demons.
To demons,
so,
yes.
so the demons are sort of connected to repressed sexuality and repressed political things, but the demons actually take on actual shape in the novel.
Yes, in some instances, it's possible that the demons are psychosomatic, but in other chapters, they seem to be real, and they sort of are erupting. Because I think that if a society denies certain evils in its midst, that out of the sort of the unconscious there will come this the return of the repressed. So you have a very, very repressed but hypocritical society. The children of that society, I believe, will act out what the parents have denied.
Yeah.
As the children can see unsparingly, and young teenagers can see unsparingly what the older generation is not speaking of. And I think that's one of the problems maybe in American culture, that the young people are picking up on the hypocrisy of the elders, and they don't want to accept it, and they have their own mores.
Speaking of the devil, it must have been quite a daredevil act to write about these demonic happenings and the Bark Kingdom, and
Yes.
in a historical setting like this.
Yes. Well, this tradition in New Jersey, the Jersey Devil, that's not known anymore over here. This is such a sane part of the world. And you come to...
It's all repression.
Well, I don't think so.
No.
I mean, I think you're much less. I mean, you always have been much less repressed than the United States. We have such hypocrisy in our country. It's just bizarre. No, I love the United States, and I don't want it to get back home that I'm saying anything negative at all. The CIA will have me assassinated. Maybe a drone will come and get me. Did I just say that?
Both the doors.
Yes. Well, I have to leave. I have to leave at some point. I have to walk. So I have to walk across some open area at some point in my life. But I think that the idea of demons may have come from Europe and come from a Christian or religion culture originally, but demons are still believed in energetically and wholeheartedly, you could say, in the United States. Yep. If you ask a given number of people, about 90% of people believe in God. Of course, nobody ever says exactly what that God is. It's just like their God. Like cats believe in a cat God, and dogs have a dog God, and everybody's got their own special God, but it's not quite the same God. And one God smites down another God, and this is the real God, but this is like a pretend God, and but anyway, they all say they believe in God, whether they even know what they're talking about. Then a whole lot of people, and I forget the statistic, it's so depressing, let's say 87% of people, they believe in a devil. But a lot of them believe, again, energetically, they believe in hell. But you know who's going to hell? Not them. Yeah. It's just all their enemies and all the other people are going to hell, and they're going to heaven. To us, it seems somewhat childlike. I didn't say childish. I said it's sort of childlike cosmology, but to them it seems believable, and they have this strange energy for it. That's what's a little scary.
Well, we're not too far away from the Salem witch trials.
Not at all.
Here, right?
That's very much the same thing. Yes, in the 1950s in the United States, it was communists.
Yeah.
The commies and the communist sympathizers who might have just been liberal people who believed in freedom of speech. If you believe in freedom of speech and the Second Amendment, freedom of the press, you may have been labeled a communist. Before that, decades before, you might have been a devil. Now you might be a terrorist. The words change a little bit.
So it's not it's not that difficult to see why the people in power can use demonization as a tool, but it's actually more of a mystery. What's in it for the common people? Why do they need to demonize others in their life?
Well, Nietzsche, I think, analyzed the situation fairly well. He said there are weak and strong personalities, and leaving for the moment the problems that we have with that. But Nietzsche said that a weak person is somebody who would like to hurt other people and would like power, is afraid to. But the weak person vows allegiance to the strong, like Hitler would have had a great attraction for very weak people because they looked to him to do the evil and meanness and wickedness that they were afraid to do. And so that's the same thing. I think there's a good deal of truth in that. Yeah. The distrust and fear and xenophobic hatred of the other, of the stranger, is hardwired into our species. But that doesn't mean that we can't overcome it with education and goodwill. The fear of people whose eyes slant different from ours or skin a different color, that is part of our species, and that's why we survived. And maybe the Neanderthals were more trusting, and they didn't have that kind of fear, and so we killed the Neanderthals probably, or the Cro-Magnons. You can sort of see how that would work, that one group of people is not so paranoid as the others, but we have some built-in leanings toward paranoia, fear of the other. But as I say, that doesn't have to be the whole story of society, because society can be educated, and we can rise above that, and many people have risen above that.
Maybe we should read a little bit again, and this
Okay.
is a part where evil actually introduces itself in the very fine circles of Princeton.
Well, first of all, to introduce this a little, I had this fantasy or this daydream of a marriage, a wedding, and the woman or the young woman, because women got married very young, you had to marry them off quickly before they wised up. So you'd marry off your daughter when she was about 18 or 19 in those days, before she knew what was coming. So a representative of this, the leading social family, who is very pretty, but naive, and she is actually intelligent, but she knows enough not to show that. That she's marrying a person who looks like a toad. He's this really ugly, kind of weird-looking person, but she seems to be under a spell, and she loves him. And I thought that was like a symbol of many marriages. That, you know, there's this couple. It doesn't have to be that the woman is the normal one and the man is looking like a toad. I mean, they could both be looking weird, or the man is normal and the woman is weird or something. And they're in love in some infatuated way. But other people, maybe the best friend, maybe the mother of the bride, or maybe somebody, they look and they see that's a disastrous marriage. And this person, they're not a good match, you know. And you think, why are they doing that? And some people look back upon themselves, like 20 years later, and say, wow, why did I do that? They look at the wedding picture and they see that they have actually had married a toad. You know, and my friend Gloria Vanderbilt has a memoir about her different love relationship. It's called "It Seemed Important at the Time," which I think is the greatest title. The greatest title for a memoir about love affairs and romances. Seemed important at the time.
So this is a bit of a fairy tale.
The fairy tale.
Yeah, but there's another fairy tale in it, because she's actually supposed to be marrying this handsome lieutenant.
Yes. And he turns
we don't know who is, and he's probably not as pretty on the inside as on the outside. The
handsome lieutenant, we find out, she doesn't know. She doesn't exactly know what's wrong with him, but we find out that he's really, shall we say, a gay vampire? Does that sound right? Mm-hmm. Gay is not really the right word for a cannibalistic vampire. Anyway, he's not the nice person that his family, her family thinks she's marrying this handsome person, but he's really awful. So she's recoiling from the handsome person, and she winds up with this person. So anyway, that's a preliminary to this. And this is really the center of the plot of the novel, because this sets all the different actions in play. Annabelle. According to Adelaide Burr, seated in the second row, directly behind the Slades, it was Todd Slade who first exhibited an awareness of the low hissing sound in the church and agitation. Another was Woodrow Wilson, possibly, with his acute hearing and extreme sensitivity of all his senses, who glanced about, frowning and squinting, then with disapproval. One by one, numerous persons heard the hissing, or imagined they heard, though what it was they were hearing, no one could have said. Nor could they have sworn that the sound was audible, and not rather an uncanny vibration of the air, as if a high-pitched whistle were being blown, undetectable to the human ear. Yet Dabney Bayard, kneeling at the altar, seemed to hear nothing and to be aware of nothing except the minister's gravely intoning voice. Dabney Bayard, do you take Annabelle to be your lawful wedded wife? And his own solemn reply, I do. The muscles of Lieutenant Bayard's jaws clenched as if in a sudden spasm of nerves, and he turned to his beautiful bride only to see, with some shock, that the demure Annabel was scarcely aware of him or of the minister. Her blue-violet widened eyes sought someone or something in the church, not visible, though perhaps at the very rear of the austere old building. Annabel, come. Yet the ritual proceeded. Reverend Fitz Randolph made his final pronouncement. In the name of the Lord, I pronounce you man and wife. And yet even now, when the bride and groom should be embracing and kissing, the low hissing sound grew louder like rising waves, and Annabel shuddered and drew away from Lieutenant Bayard in a fainting gesture, as if she failed to recognize him. By this time, the whispering had increased in volume. Each individual who heard it was perplexed and some frightened, stricken with a numb sort of panic, not knowing if he or she truly heard, or had lapsed into a temporary sort of faintness or madness in this humid public place that had now seemed to turn hostile. For such is the devil's power to tease us and terrify us as to whether we are in his spell or merely caught up in childish fantasies. As this infamous hit episode in Princeton history moves to its conclusion, I will acknowledge that I am relying almost exclusively upon my predecessor, Q.T. Hollinger, as well as a miscellany of letters, journals, and diaries written by local observers. For otherwise, the episode is totally beyond my comprehension. Yet it is clear that the bold summons, Annabel, come to me, is from Annabel's seducer, Axon mate, who stands at the rear of the church, not taking a step inside. Not daring to take a step inside, commentators will note, for the sanctified church is a holy place into which the devil or any of his demons cannot enter. Yet though Axon mate may not enter the church, he has the power to draw Annabel Slade, now Mrs. Annabel Bayard, from her husband's side, as forcibly as if he has stridden into the church and along the crimson carpet to seize the trembling young woman by the nape of her neck and lead her away with him. Annabel, it is time. You will come with me at once. And so the bride turns from her bridegroom blindly, drops her floral bouquet onto the carpet, glancing to neither side but with her gaze fixed to the commanding figure in the doorway, hurries up the aisle with the wounded grace of an injured bird, her lips parted in breathless subjection, and the most subtle and sensual of female smiles. Annabel, my love, have you not been naughty? So Axon mate declares in a low, mocking voice, and while the wedding guests turn to stare in gawking horror, the toad-like creature grips the bride roughly in his arms and presses upon her lips a kiss of the most carnal heat and manly authority.
Joyce, you have been teaching at Princeton since 1978. You are about to stop your time at Princeton together. Is this a nice way to say goodbye?
Well, I'm retiring from full-time teaching, but I'll be teaching one class probably for a while.
Okay, yeah.
It's just mostly full-time teaching. But the Princeton of 1905-06 is very different from Princeton of 2014. It's a completely different world now. As I said, we have had a Jewish president, we have a woman president, we have diverse students on campus from every ethnic minority that there is, and some that seem just made up. I mean, all kinds of people in Princeton who didn't even exist in those times.
We have touched upon the presidents of yore. Woodrow Wilson, Teddy Roosevelt is there as well. Very funny portrait of him.
That's true, a true portrait.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh yes, all the portraits of the famous men are very true, very accurate. Jack London. Yeah. That's the way he was.
So the portrait of the writers, they are not contrafactual in any way. They are actually the portrait of Jack London and Upton Sinclair. Yeah.
Well, Upton Sinclair is one of the heroes of the novel. He's so sweet and naive and idealistic, and he keeps thinking the revolution is coming maybe in a year. And there'll be complete equality for everybody, and working men and women and children will be treated very well, and women's rights, He thought was just coming very, very soon in 1905.
It's not a surprise to us when we read the novel that the meeting between Upton Sinclair and Jack London goes a little bit awry.
That's right.
Did they actually meet?
Oh, yes.
Yeah?
And the letter, some of the things that Jack London said to him are from a letter that he wrote. Yeah. Well, Upton Sinclair was a vegetarian.
Yeah.
And Jack London's preferred food was raw meat.
Yeah.
So you can see there was a real failure to communicate there. Yeah. And Jack London was this, like a very macho man. He believed in the Nordic soul. And we're in a sort of Nordic place here. He was of the Nordic people. He would just go ranting and raving about the Nordic people, sort of like the Aryan people. The race of the Aryans and the Nordic people are completely different from the Southern Europeans or some other, other race. Now, the Nazis actually had a cosmology where the Aryan race came from, I think, from a star or from some frost or something. And then the rest of the human races came from, well, we don't even want to know where they came from. And some of their scientists were pretending to believe this complete gibberish and nonsense. But there's always been, at the basis of these discriminatory prejudices, there's always been some strange cosmology, like you're the chosen person, and then the rest of us are damned, or the chosen people are over there, and these are the damned people.
Yeah. One thing I have to ask you: how on earth do you do what you do? You write so many books; they're all excellent. How do you execute so much work of this caliber?
Well, for many years, I have a very large cat. And there are any cat people in the audience. When the cat will sit in your lap, and if you try to get up, the cat puts the claws down. So basically, Misty wouldn't let me up.
Yeah.
Misty or Fluffy or whatever her name. There have been a number of cats, Fluffy, Misty, Christabel. And then my kitty right now is Cherie, and she's just like that. They purr, they sleep, they purr, and their tails switch if they're not happy. So you end up writing not 1 hour, not 2 hours, but like 10 hours because the cat's having a nap. So that's a serious answer to your question.
I'm really glad there wasn't a supernatural answer.
Well, what I like about writing is basically that there's stories of human beings, of say a girl who falls so much in love with her sister's fiancé, and he is definitely worth her love, but he will never love her. But her love for him is so powerful and blinding to her. It really it destroys her life and his life, and she doesn't really make a decision that way. And then the families. I love to write about families and the interrelationships between the families. And I think that and The Accursed is a family novel. It's about the Slade family. Yeah. A brother tries to protect his sister and what the brother does to help his sister, and how the brother falls in love with an emancipated woman and so forth. It's all sort of like stories of families and how what's repressed in one generation is expressed in the next generation.
Joyce Carol Oates, thank you very much.
Thank you.